So, broadly speaking, corruption is when you have individuals or entities abusing usually political power that they've been given by the populace they're governing and using this to either further their own goals or, in their eyes, for the betterment of their state or culture. This can be both explicit and implicit, where they can be directly going against the law, consciously doing something they know is either immoral or illegal, or it could be implicit, something that they're doing that isn't necessarily something they're doing because they're evil or because they want to do something wrong, but something that they're benefiting in some manner, even though it is not necessarily a ethical manner. At a more domestic level, you have things like political campaign contributions. You can only donate a few $1,000s per person, but obviously there are ways to skirt this. Corporations, for instance, are technically people, so there's different regulations for how they give money in that sense. But broadly speaking, they can still give money. But an obvious problem that can arise is that if you have, let's just say, $10 million in political contributions to your campaign, and let's say that 6 million of those donations come from 4% of your donors, that that's a problem, simply because that incentivizes you to listen to that 4% of the people because they give you the most of your money, even though they're not, obviously 4% is not the majority of your constituents. And people who donate those kinds of money fundamentally just have different problems. Someone who is CEO of Walmart, for instance, is fundamentally going to have different problems than the guy who works minimum wage.
Researchers at Princeton University looked at more than 20 years worth of data to answer a pretty simple question: does the government represent the people? Now, this is what they found. This axis here represents public support for any given idea. On the left at 0% are ideas that not a single American wants. On the right at 100% are ideas that everyone supports. This axis represents the likelihood of Congress passing a law that reflects any of these ideas, from a 0 to a 100% chance. On this graph, an ideal republic would look like this. If 50% of the public supports an idea, there's a 50% chance of it becoming law. If 80% of us support something, there's an 80% chance. You get the idea. Now, most Americans would probably agree that, with a few exceptions, we should be as close to this ideal as possible. Unfortunately, the way America actually works doesn't even come close. Take an idea that nobody supports, literally nobody, and it has about a 30% chance of becoming federal law. Now, take an incredibly popular idea, the most popular idea this country has ever seen, and there's also about a 30% chance of it becoming law. This means that the number of American voters for or against any idea has no impact on the likelihood that Congress will make it law. Put another way, and I'm just going to quote the Princeton study directly here, the preferences of the average American appear to have only a minuscule, near zero, statistically non-significant impact upon public policy. But there's a catch. This flat line only accounts for the bottom 90% of income earners in America. Economic elites, business interests, people who can afford lobbyists, they get their own line. Look at how much closer their line is to the ideal. When they want something, the government is much more likely to do it. And when they don't, they have the power to completely block it from happening, no matter how much the rest of the country supports it. They get what they want, and guess who ends up paying for it?
Income inequality is, broadly speaking, the disparity between the richest and poorest Americans and what they earn annually. So income inequality is affecting the world at large. It's just a more significant problem in the US. You can see this because by the early to mid 70s, real wages, meaning the wages that have been adjusted for inflation, for the bottom 80% have largely stayed the same, while the wages for the top 20% have risen significantly. You can also see the top 5% have an even more dramatic rise in their wages, far surpassing and dwarfing any of the other brackets. And as the disparity grows, the poorer become increasingly reliant on the richer. This leads to something known as wealth inequality. It also stifles innovation as wealth begets wealth, meaning those at the top of the socioeconomic chain remain entrenched there.
The Democracy Index is an index compiled by the Economist Intelligence Unit. It intends to measure the state of democracy in 167 countries, of which 166 are sovereign states and 164 are UN member states. In 2016, the United States was downgraded from a full democracy to a flawed democracy. Its score, which had been declining for some years, crossed the threshold from 8.05 in 2015 to 7.98 in 2016. The report states that this was caused by a myriad of factors dating back to at least the late 1960s, which have eroded the Americans' trust in governmental institutions. Flawed democracies are nations where elections are fair and free and basic civil liberties are honored, but may have issues, like media freedom infringement and minor suppression of political opposition and critics. These nations have significant fault in other democratic aspects, including underdeveloped political culture, low levels of participation in politics, and issues in the functioning of governance.
Right now, it's perfectly legal for special interests to hand huge checks to the members of Congress who regulate them. It's perfectly legal for those same members of Congress to pass laws to help out lobbyists who offer them a cushy job when they leave office. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. From million-dollar bundlers to the threat of a super PAC smear campaign, there are literally dozens of perfectly legal ways to buy a public official. But that makes the solution pretty obvious. Make corruption illegal. All of it. And that is where the American Anti-Corruption Act comes in. It introduces a strict set of ethical standards, so if you're an elected official on, say, the Senate Banking Committee, you can't take donations from banking lobbyists. It mandates full transparency, so the American people know exactly who's trying to buy our elected officials. It changes how elections are funded, so clean candidates can win without selling out to special interests. And it does all of this while protecting the people's right to free speech. That's because the act was written by top constitutional scholars, conservative and liberal alike, to stand up to the toughest scrutiny. You can read the full text of the act at anticorruptionact.org. Here's our plan, in 5 steps. First, we'll need a law to pass. One that, actually fixes things. Okay, Anti-Corruption Act. Check. Next, we need to bring conservatives and progressives together and get organized. It's the only way to build enough power to defeat the politically entrenched and well-funded opposition. We're in good shape there, though, because everyone already agrees we need to fix our corrupt system. In fact, local Tea Partiers and progressive activists actually teamed up to pass America's first Anti-Corruption Act in 2014. And the movement has racked up even more victories since. There are more than 22,000 cities in America where we can use the ballot initiative process to pass locally tailored anti-corruption acts. And this really matters. We're protecting our communities from corruption, so our schools, hospitals, local resources, and jobs are no longer under the constant threat of getting sold out to special interests. Plus, citywide initiatives and resolutions build momentum for the most powerful way we can go around Congress: passing anti-corruption acts in states. State acts not only clean up statewide corruption, they change how elections are funded so clean candidates can win office without selling out to special interests. That goes for federal candidates from that state too. Once we pass these state laws, we can send a new wave of representatives and senators to Washington. State by state, we can fill Congress with leaders who got elected under the rules of our new anti-corruption acts, replacing entrenched politicians with new blood. See how this works? By taking the fight to the states, we can fix Congress from the outside. And when these new representatives get to Congress, free from dependence on special interests, they'll be free to vote for and pass the American Anti-Corruption Act at the federal level to fix this problem for good. So that's the plan.